Okay, people, after this, only one more, and you get to take a big test. Woo! Alright, artistic innovations of the 20th century. More change, politics, war, decolonization. Europe's power wanes as US, Russia, and Japan become greater and bigger. Science and medicine start prolonging life. There are more people now, which is impacting the Earth's environment. Civil rights, huge. Literacy expands. We have education to the masses and mass media. And communication helps to lessen isolation. We have first wars on a global scale. We have advances in weaponry. Britain and France dominate in the 19th century, but now it's the US and Soviet Union in the 20th century. We have the Cold War. We have the fear of nuclear war. We have the United Nations. Ford introduces the Model T in 1908. Then we have high-speed trains. Then jetliners. Then commercial air travel. Then space shuttles. Radio, TV, computers, and internet. Medicine with antibiotics and penicillin and vaccines. Vaccines for measles, chickenpox, and the flu. Polio on a large scale is eradicated. An invention of the light bulb, plastic, frozen foods, scuba gear, and the list goes on. So many innovations, and it just keeps going faster and faster and faster. Art is now more varied and with styles and material, and artists believe art should be innovative. The movements are radical and they are quick. Remember, it used to be they would last for centuries, now decades. And we'll have expressionism, cubism, futurism, dada, surrealism, de style, abstract expressionism, pop art, conceptual art, and earth art. Artists do not care about representational art anymore, or necessarily anything that's beautiful or universal. They eliminate almost all characteristics that would normally define something as art. Imagery becomes difficult to read. They start developing abstraction, things that are totally non-objective. They're more into colors, lines, and shapes. They are inspired by change. Art is dynamic and innovative. And they want to explain how some find the new world frightening. But some art will be optimistic and other art will be pessimistic. Carson Pirie Scott Building, architecture. Cast iron, remember first with the Iron Bridge. Cast iron was used in St. Anne's Church in Liverpool, constructed 1770 to 72, and the Crystal Palace in 1851. That was for the Great Exhibition in London. The Crystal Palace was designed by Joseph Paxton, 1,851 feet long, and it is 128 feet high. It had 990,000 feet of open space. Again, cast iron and plate glass. It closed at the close of the Great Exhibition. They rebuilt the Crystal Palace at Sydenham Hall in southeast London in 1854. It was destroyed, however, by fire in 1936. The problem with cast iron, it melts. There were innovations in steel. Steel is an alloy of iron and carbon that will be stronger and harder than iron, and it can also be mass produced. So now architects are coming up with steel cage construction. These are vertical steel columns and horizontal beams that are riveted together. It creates a skeleton and other materials are hung on it. The distribution of weight allows for lighter structures. William LeBaron Jenney in 1883 first uses steel cage construction in the Home Insurance Building in Chicago in 1885. This leads to the skyscraper. Okay, development of the skyscraper. On 9 p.m. on October 8, 1871, a barn at DeKoven Street caught fire. Chicago had already been on fire, or had fires, the previous few days, and the firefighters were tired, exhausted. And 48 hours later, most of the city had burned to the ground. It was $192 million in damage. The city at the time was worth 575 million. So it was a little less than half, about a third of it just gone. 100,000 people were left homeless. And if you've ever heard, there was a story that it was caused by Mrs. O'Leary's cow who kicked over a lantern and caught the hay on fire, but it's just an urban legend. All right. Here's a picture of the Crystal Palace. Okay, see the arches, see the cast iron and plate glass. That was the construction. So you see the iron skeleton. And this is the home insurance building. Now, the city of Chicago is now a blank slate. Remember, most of it has just been burnt down. So for some, it's like, oh, all right, here's a chance to rebuild a city. Yay. It is an innovative time for architects in Chicago. In 1843, Frederick Letts had a foundry for cast iron. And again, cast iron is not fireproof. It melts in fire, which would mean the utter destruction of the building. So now they start building them in cast iron and steel. And they get into fireproofing. They take tile sheaths and cover the steel. George H. Johnson invented hollow tile. They also start using reinforced concrete. And there's the perfection of the safety elevator. Elisha Otis in 1852. He creates something that helps to prevent a cab from plunging if the cable should break. And then you notice if you ever get into elevators now, you will likely see that word Otis in the elevator. The first steam-driven elevator is first installed at the Charles B. Farwell store in 1864. Then we have hydraulic elevators in 1870. So now buildings can go higher because elevators can take people up. Now people are wondering, well, what should a skyscraper look like? Ada Louise Huxtable wrote a book, and she identified the 4 phases of skyscrapers: functional, eclectic, modern, postmodern. Think FEMP, FEMP. Functional is cost efficient. They use Greek style with their columns that would have a base, the shaft, and then capstones. And we'll look at one, you'll see how it looks like a Greek style. Then the eclectic era with decorative play, using Gothic, Greek, and Italian style, mixing it. Modern, the international style, is a more stripped down aesthetic, sleek glass walls. Postmodern is nostalgia and novelty, so looking to the past but also looking to the future. Skyscrapers are an efficient use of land. It makes plots more profitable because the higher you go, the more you can build in and the less land you need. Also, with the advances of plumbing, heating, lighting, and ventilation, it makes living in these, well, livable. Louis Sullivan. He was born in Boston in 1856, and he loved bridges. When he learned that architects were the ones who designed bridges, he wanted to become an architect. He goes to MIT for 1 year, and then he goes to Philadelphia and works in the architecture firm of Furness and Hewitt as an apprentice draftsman for a year. He finds that he loves decorative ornament in architecture. And then he moves to Chicago in 1873. This is during the building boom. Remember, the fire happened in 1871. He works at the office of Jenny. He is the one credited with the invention of the steel cage construction. And then Sullivan goes to Paris in 1874. He studies at the École des Beaux-Arts. Then he comes back to Chicago in 1875. Now he's working at the office of Johnson Edelman. Then he moves to David Adler's firm in 1879 and is made a partner in 1880 and an equal partner in 1881. That's huge. Okay, now, the time he spent with Adler, he built more memorable structures, including the Wainwright Building in St. Louis in 1891 and the Prudential Building in Buffalo in 1894, and they look somewhat similar. Now, we talked about that first style, the functional style. Remember, it said it would have the base, so it kind of looks like a column. Here's your base. Here then is your structure, and then here's the cap. So those are the three areas in the skyscraper. Sullivan, however, had problems. He was an alcoholic, he was arrogant, he was inflexible, he had erratic behaviors. Normally, geniuses aren't easy to work with. And the Carson Peary Scott project came up. It was his last major urban project before he dies in 1924. Sullivan gives us the famous saying, "Form ever follows function." Form before, or was it form follows function?
Mm-hmm.
Form follows function. Remember that, Sullivan. And basically it means the building is shaped by the purpose for it. He wrote an 1896 treatise, The Tall Office Building Artistically Considered. And skyscrapers are not about anything old, but about new needs. These are his ideas. Okay. The building. It was at first commissioned by Schlesinger and Meyer. They had been in business since the Civil War. Adler and Sullivan were originally hired in 1891 to build an addition to the original first structure, which was designed by Boyington in 1873. The project, however, gets abandoned in 1893. There is an economic depression, so nothing is done. And then Adler and Sullivan dissolve their partnership, probably because of Sullivan's problems. In 1899, Schlesinger and Meyer hire Sullivan to build a new structure. And in 1903, two adjacent structures were demolished, and Sullivan was hired to extend the 1899 edifice. So he began working on this in 1899. In 1904, Carson Peary and Scott had purchased Schlesinger and Meyer, and the building assumed that name. That's 1904. That's when it became Carson Peary Scott. In 1906, there's another addition, but other architects have been hired. However, they follow Sullivan's original design. The building itself is at 1 South Street at the corner of State and Madison. It is steel frame. It has some cast iron columns. There are 6 large bays down Madison and 12 down State Street. The height changes down each side. The tallest section is 12 stories. The base has low relief. The windows are typical Chicago windows. They will have 3 parts: a large central panel and then 2 smaller flanking panels. They're sheathed with terracotta tiles to fireproof them. And each story is decorated with ornamental bands framing the windows at both the sill and the lintel, the bottom and the top. The roof line has changed over times. Sullivan originally had an overhanging roof slab or cornice. Now it's a parapet, which is like a little wall, but many people consider that too small for the building. There is ornate foliage decoration at the street level. It was intended to call attention to the building and the window displays. And Sullivan did this on purpose. He knew that it was to attract customers. So then they would, look at the building, then look at the windows, now I want to go inside. It was done in Art Nouveau style. That, remember, deals with leaves and long lines. And the architect's initials, LHS, are embedded in the ornament. Talk about modesty. Okay. It was sketched out by Sullivan, but it was worked out by George Grant Elmsley, who had worked for him. The plaster molds were by Christian Snyder. He had worked for Sullivan for 20 years, creating plaster molds for him. The molds were then cast in iron. They're painted a bronzed green. So what you do is you paint it red, then you paint it green, and then the red kind of shows through to make it look like copper that's been iodized. Carson's company Centennial was in 1955. So they gilded the decoration They painted it black the next year, and it is gray now. Other additions were added. There was another one in 1960. Holabird and Root added an 8-story element. They increased the number of bay windows by 3. The original foliage ornament was copied and cast in aluminum, and the building was designated a landmark in 1970. Carson's closed in 2007, and the building owners renamed it Sullivan Center, of course, after him, and it is now a Target store. So here is the building, one of the originals. You'll notice the overhanging piece. Here we see it, modern day. You'll notice now it's just a little wall on top. Nothing overhangs. And this is a close-up look of the foliage work. So you can see, really ornate. Nice to see. All right, so now we move on to Picasso, Still Life with Chair Caning. Cubism is of central importance in the 20th century. It's going to challenge ways of seeing the world. Picasso and Braque worked closely together in Paris in 1906 and 1907. Avant-garde. Avant-garde means you're at the fore of a movement, that you're pushing it. And these gentlemen wanted to feel more truthful or have more reality in what they were doing. The first phase of Cubism is called analytic. The way to explain it is, imagine drawing a teacup. You could do an outline, simple, turn it over and then draw it from that point of view. Now look inside and draw it from that point of view. All viewpoints are real. They're all the different ways you could look at a teacup. But then when you put all those images together, it almost becomes illegible. But this is the idea of Cubism, is thinking of all the viewpoints, but putting them all together. And the name Cubism was actually an insult. Just as Impressionism was, so was Cubism. Louis Vaucel, a critic, called the painting bizarre cubique, or cubic oddities. The name, however, stuck. Now the second phase is synthetic Cubism, and this is when you have the use of non-art materials. Now remember, Picasso and Braque worked together very closely, but Picasso is generally more well known. However, some important breakthroughs were made by Braque. And Picasso remembers, almost every evening, either I went to Braque's studio or Braque came to mine, and for a while neither would consider a painting completed until both said the painting was done. The movement does attract other artists, and in 1911, Paris Salon de Indépendance has an exhibition in Salle 41, which is room 41. And other Cubist painters are Metzinger, Glaise, Léger, and Delaunay. They also exhibited. And Cubism will influence Futurism in Italy and De Stijl in the Netherlands, other two important movements. Okay, collage as a new artistic process. A key in the synthetic phase of Cubism was collage. In 1912, Picasso and Braque experimented with everyday materials and objects. Braque took a leap forward. He bought some wallpaper, cut it up. It had this fake wood grain pattern, and then he applied pieces of this to his charcoal drawings. He creates a piece called Fruit Dish in Glass in 1912. So he invents what's called papier-collé, or pasted paper. Braque was shocked with what he had created. He shows Picasso, who becomes really excited, and then makes about 100 different works in like 2 weeks. Picasso also starts working with other materials, colored paper, wallpaper scraps, music sheets, and newspaper. This is Fruit Dish and Glass, the collage by Braque, and you'll notice that these little pieces here, those are the pieces of wallpaper that he added, and again what you'll notice that he continues to kind of draw on them, so they're incorporated into the piece. Papier collé is a specific form of collage, paper only use. But collages can have other materials. It's radical at the time. We're so used to it, it's something you have kindergartners do, but this was new at the time. And using mundane or ordinary materials was very shocking. And Picasso said, "Perhaps we'll succeed in disgusting everybody. We have a lot more tricks up our sleeve." Okay, Picasso's bio and career. He was one of the most important artists in the 20th century. Not only with Cubism, he also helped to bring about open welded sculpture. And he had an amazing breadth. Tens of thousands of works. This guy did a lot. Painting, sculpting, drawing, printing, textiles, ceramics, and stage design. Here is his name. Yes, this is really his name. Pablo Diego San Francisco de Paulo Juan Nepomuceno Maria de los Remedios Cipriana de la Santísima Trinidad Ruiz y Picasso. Yeah, that's really his name. He was born in 1881 in Malaga, Spain. He first studied with his dad. His dad was a teacher, Jose Ruiz y Blasco. Look, that's a short name. And he taught at the Escuela Provincial de Bellas Artes in Malaga. In 1895, he goes to the School of Fine Arts in Barcelona. The dad has to convince the officials to let Picasso take the entrance exam. Normally, this would take a student a month to complete. It took Picasso a week, and he was 13. And of course, he's accepted. He then goes to the Royal Academy of San Fernando in Madrid, and he moves to Paris in 1901. Okay, here is his blue period. That is 1904, 01 to 4, very somber. Then was followed by a rose period, pinkish hues and circus themes, and then Cubism. So some people think, well, he could never draw anything. Well, yes, he could. All right. After Cubism, he was involved with different styles. He explored surrealism in public art. He also had a series of romantic relationships, lots of affairs, and he often revealed his relationships in art, number even of his Cubist paintings or of his lovers. He married twice. One was to a Russian ballerina, Olga Koklova, then Jacqueline Roque. He had 4 kids, and he dies in 1974 at the age of 91. All right, the piece, Still Life with Chair Caning. It's an important piece of the 20th century. It is the first true collage in the history of art, and he finished it in March of 1912. He uses other non-art materials, pieces of rope, oilcloth. So this is synthetic cubism, not analytic cubism. And he's breaking down and analyzing forms and bringing back some reality to it. The work is meant to illustrate the cafe life in Paris. This is what Braque and Picasso really loved. So it's a tabletop with a glass. On it's a slice of lemon, a pipe, a newspaper. A chair is introduced by the caning pattern, so perhaps you're seeing the chair through the glass of the tabletop. The fruit is in the upper right. The stem of the pipe is in the upper left. And you also see the letters J-O-U. This means game in French, but it could be the first letters of journal, meaning that it could be a journal or a newspaper. But this could also mean that it's a puzzle or a game for the viewer to figure out the meaning of this piece. So Picasso's being playful. The lower portion has oilcloth on it. That is cloth lined with linseed oil to make it water resistant. And oilcloth was used to protect luggage. Rope is added to create an oval form, as in the shape of a table. So this piece is easy to read, yet difficult to comprehend. So there you see, that's the pipe stem. That's the lemon. Do you see the letters J-O-U? Here will be pieces of the oilcloth. Obviously, you see the rope. That's supposed to be the shape of the table. Underneath would be the chair. Perhaps this is a portion covering the table. But again, This is just representing the different viewpoints. All right, now on to Pollock. November 1st, 1950, Lavender Mist. Pollock. He is into abstract expressionism. After World War I, this happens. This is abstract expressionism starts in America, in New York. It's the first art movement developed in the U.S. to achieve international recognition. And now New York is the center of the art world, and it's called the New York School. And you know what? I think I made a mistake. I think I shouldn't be doing Pollock. I think I should have done... Yep, I forgot to do Monet, so we'll do Monet real quick. All right, Impressionism. Woo! Sorry, I have to go back a little bit. This happens in France at the end of the 19th century. Realism was before Impressionism. Impressionists also went to paint the world, mostly Paris in the 1870s and 80s. They love the new boulevards of the city. They love entertainment. It's modern in subject matter and style. But Impressionism is not a name they selected. They call themselves Société Anonyme des Artistes, Painters, Sculptors, Graveurs, etc. Yeah, long name. They had hostile critics. Louis Leroy discussed Monet's Impression Sunrise and said, "Impression, I was certain of it. Preliminary drawing for wallpaper is more finished than this." Ouch. So they become known as Impressionists. So the term Impressionist and Cubism were both insults. Impressionists had 8 shows in Paris, 1874, 1886. Monet, Renoir, Degas, Sisley, Pissarro, Cassatt, and Morisot are Impressionist painters. The last 2, female. But the person credited with creating it is Manet, M-A-N-E-T. The styles are different. Loose brush strokes, and a lack of finish. And they want to show modern movement in an optically true style. They really want to focus on how objects are affected by light. And they like to paint scenes in a glancing view, so you will see patches of color. The mind will process it and put it in some type of order. They want to paint what the eye sees and not the mind. Okay? This is Impression Sunrise. Okay, development of paint in collapsible metal tubes. This really helps. It helps because now they have pre-mixed paints. Before, artists had to mix their own. Then they would get paint from colormen, who sold it in the bladder of a pig. This was very difficult to use. First, it wasn't portable, and you had to make a hole in it and then seal it up each time. So if you didn't seal it up just right, the paint would dry out, or the bladders could burst. Just kind of gross. Then they were replaced by glass syringes, which were invented by James Hams. It's kind of funny, pig bladder, then Hams. And he was an English artist in 1822. However, it's still fragile. But in 1841, an American painter, John Rand, developed the collapsible metal tube with the screw lid. Thank you, Rand. And it's easily stored and taken outside, so now they can paint in plein air, which means outside. Monet. He was born in Paris in 1840. The family moves to Le Havre. His dad was a grocer, and he was supplying ships. However, the family could not support Monet's art career. He was studying under Eugene Boudin, and Monet goes to Paris to study. Dad said he would help, but only if Monet worked with established academic artists. And of course, once he starts getting into the Impressionism thing, then forget about it. He joins Charles Glaire's studio, and there he meets Renoir and Sisley. So his formal education is very brief. And he had minimal success at the Parisian salon, and he was almost always poor. He was always asking for loans or skipping out on bills. And then in 1870, he marries Camille Donceau, who was his model. They have 2 kids, Jean and Michel. She dies of tuberculosis in 1879, just 9 years later. And then he moves in with the family of Ernest Hosched, a wealthy store owner and patron. They move to well, I don't know, you gotta say that one. Hosched, however, goes bankrupt and he leaves the family. Monet, however, and Ernest's wife Alice just kind of set up house and continue living together in Paris. And then they move to Giverny. This is important. This is where Monet does much of his painting, and he would live for the rest of his life. Alice and Monet marry in 1892 after her husband dies, and his career takes off in the 1880s. Monet's dealer, Paul Durand Ruel, is good at selling, so now Monet's doing better. In the 1880s and 1890s, until his death in 1926, he paints a series of subjects from various viewpoints: haystacks, poplar trees, the facade of the ruined cathedral, and his ever-famous water lilies in his garden. The Gare Saint-Lazare painting is one of his early works. Alice dies in 1911, and then he gets cataracts. And of course, that's when you have difficulty, these things form in your eyes and you can't see. He has 2 operations in 1923, and they work, but his eyesight is still altered. He dies of lung cancer in 1926 at the age of 86. His home and garden are willed to the French Academy of Fine Arts in 1966 and is a tourist spot today. All right, the painting. The train station was renovated under the Haussmannization program. Baron Haussmann was hired by Napoleon III to modernize the city in 1860. New rail lines, new bridges, new boulevards, new parks, and a sewer system. So things just get great. And this is one of 12 views that he makes in 1877. Remember, he likes to do a series of things. He's looking at something, but from different viewpoints. This one is hung at the entrance to galleries. The reviews were good, and Émile Zola, he's huge in France at the time, and he's an art critic, and he congratulated Monet, and that should be Monet, not money. Now, some of his paintings will show the station from the outside. Others look toward the platform. Some are within the station. Maybe Monet felt no one point of view could sum up this complex space. He received special permission to paint and sketch, and most were completed in his studio. The sketches were started at the station, but again, completed in his studio. The true subject, however, is empty space. Between himself and an object, the space is called a scene, and the industry becomes muted and hazy as steam and smoke fill to soften and form the colors. So you see most of it here, it's just space, because again, the focus is on light and how light is affected. The train station is a marvel to behold. Powerful steam engines would come in. The shed was an arch wonder. It was an iron skeleton with immense glass skylights. We had regularized repeated arches and an arch in truss forms made of cast iron, and the station still stands today. And this is where we shall end. Maybe. It's not showing up. Tell you, if I did all this for nothing, I'd be a little greedy. And no, there we go. Ciao for now.